Next up is lesson 7 about audio mixing on the edit page. This is probably going to end up being the last lesson on your first day if you're doing this as a 3-day course. So anyway, when you start off with lesson 7, audio mixing on the edit page, the first thing you want to do is reset your workspace because you were just finishing up your transitions and effects and you kind of changed the entire look of the Resolve interface. So we just go up to workspace and choose reset UI layout. And that just brings everyone back to a default setup. We'll go into our rough cuts. We'll come over and we'll find our 04 audio rough cut and just double click to load it into the viewer. It's pretty much the same timeline, just cleaned up a little bit. Okay, so once we do that, we're going to start off by working on some markers. So we talk a little bit about markers and explain what they are and how you might use them. And we start off with this O2A380 clip. So it's the third clip in the timeline. And you're going to set a marker on this clip. So the first thing we're going to do is just position our playhead right in the center there. We're going to select the clip. And then we're going to come up to our toolbar and we're going to explain the blue marker right here. And if we click on it, it's going to add the marker. Once you do that, you can come down to the marker itself and you can double click on it to open up the little dialog. And you add in some names. The first thing you might want to do is give it a name. This is going to be for sound effects. So we're going to name it SFX. This is a roaring takeoff. So we know what we need to add here. I'm going to make it red. So we click on red and then just click done. And now we have a red marker on that clip. You add the next one on the Maldives clip. Again, go into the middle of the clip somewhere, select the clip. But this time, instead of clicking on the toolbar, you explain to them the shortcut because it's much quicker to press M to add the marker and then M again to open up the dialog. So M, and again, we'll call this SFX and we'll say this is an overhead prop plane and we'll make it red again and then we can say done. Okay, the third marker is over this South Pole clip. And when we do this one, we're not going to select the clip. We add this one to the timeline itself. All we're going to do is we're going to move our playhead over it and then hit M and notice that it's on the time ruler. Hit M again, sound effects, and it will be loud prop plane. And it should be red again. And then we say done. So now we have 3 markers. The last marker is just an add-on. It's a new feature in Resolve 15. We talk about annotations. It doesn't have to be on this clip, but you can do it on this clip. And this time we're going to add, a different colored marker. So you might want to be offset it a little bit just so you're on a different frame. Near the beginning maybe. And we're just going to come and select this menu and we're going to say a yellow marker this time. We're going to make it last the length of the clip, so we'll hold down the Option key and just stretch it across the South Pole clip so they can see a duration marker. We can come in and we can add a note if we want to, VFX, move the plane down. But sometimes text isn't enough, and what you might want to do is add some drawing on the frame. So the way you can do that is you can just come to the on-screen control icon down here in the lower left of the viewer. You can hold down and see where it says annotations, and you just select annotations. Now, with annotations, you get a toolbar up above the viewer, which allows you to draw lines or arrows and different colors. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just select the arrow key and we're just going to come from the cockpit down just to show that you can draw an arrow there, and we'll change the color, to yellow. And that's all you really have to do, is just to show that there's a toolbar above and this is how you get it. Just for your own understanding, you don't have to set a marker first. When you choose the annotation tool, it will set a marker automatically. So to get rid of the toolbar and leave the marker, we'll just go back to transforms, make sure transform button is turned off, and there we have our annotated marker. Then we move to adding markers into the source clip. So we're going to come over into our audio clip and we have a sound effects clip in there. We're just going to double click it. There are 3 areas that we're going to mark on this clip. The first one is going to be right at the beginning. You can see this is the first peak. It's the overhead plane So we're going to add position our playhead over the peak there. You can use the arrow keys to position it perfectly. And then we're just going to hit MM. We'll just add in names here, so we don't have to type in names and notes. So we're just going to add in name here. We'll call it plane overhead. And we'll say done. The next marker is about 30 seconds in. You can see it over here in the upper area. It's this flat area, and it is the prop plane. So if we just move over to it, you'll start to hear that this is the prop plane. Kind of picks up right there. So what we're going to do this time is we are going to add a marker and hit M again to open up the dialog. And if we want this to be 3 seconds long, we can either drag it, we can type in here 3 seconds. Now our duration of this marker will be 3 seconds long, and we'll give it a name. We'll call this allowed prop plane. And say enter. And now we have a duration marker, which is 3 seconds long. The last one we're going to do is this big jet. You can see it's the peak right in the middle of the clip, so it's easy to find. We're just going to move to that peak right at the start point of it, so we can use our arrows to be at the start. We're going to mark an in point, and then we're going to play it. And right at the end of it, we'll mark an out. Then you can come into the jog bar, right click over it, and say convert into out to a duration marker. You can click on it, but sometimes it's just easier to bring up the dialog by right-clicking and saying modify the marker, and that will bring up this dialog as well. For this one, we're just going to say roaring jet takeoff and say OK. So now we have markers in our timeline, and we have markers in our source clip, and we're going to edit them in. To do some audio editing, we're going to customize the interface a little bit, because by default, Resolve gives you lots of space for video tracks, but very little space for audio tracks. So we're going to come in between the video track and the audio track. It will change to a resize cursor and just drag up so the video track is all the way up the top. Now we have a lot more room for our audio tracks. Then we're going to come into our timeline view options. Again, this is a little bit different. This is for your waveform. This is for your subtitle tracks, which we don't have enabled. This is for your stacked or tab timelines, which we don't have enabled. So the only one you want to make sure you have on is this audio waveform, so they can see audio waveforms. And then we're going to show bars. And we're going to increase the audio tracks about halfway, so we can see the waveforms in a larger track. And you have to increase the video track a little bit just so you can see the markers. Otherwise you won't see the markers on the clips themselves unless the video track is higher, unless the video track is larger. Then you click off the timeline view options window. The next thing is you need to add some tracks and patch tracks. So we're going to come down, we're going to add an audio 3 track, add audio 3 stereo. It's going to be from sound effects. We're going to patch, because this is where you'll explain this red outline around A1 is the source track, and you want to patch it to A3. So you're going to click on A3. Now you can see A1 is patched to audio 3 track in the timeline. So your source with the red outline is patched to the track in the timeline that has the name here, audio 3. You want to make sure people understand patching and what that looks like. And all you do is just click on it and it will patch. So now that that's patched, we need to find the right clips. So we're going to go to the first marker in our sound effects clip, and you can just drag to it. You can also come to show them where under playback, and you can go to previous or next marker. So if we wanted to go to the previous marker, it's just shift up arrow, and we'll go to the previous marker. Shift up arrow brings us right to it. This is the loudest part of this sound effect. So if this is the loudest part of the audio, we need to find the equivalent in the video. Where would the sound be the loudest based on the picture? And that would be if we backed it up a little bit here to where these pontoons are just kind of in the frame, kind of overhead of the cameraman. So now that we have these two sync points, the position, the playhead on the timeline and the playhead in the source viewer, then we can just do a replace edit. And we want to first mark the duration of the replace edit in the timeline. So we're just going to hit the X key. X is going to mark the clip that we're going to add the sound effect to. We want to make sure that the in and out points are cleared from the source viewer. So that's just Option X. And that's all we really have to do. We're already patched down here in the timeline. So once we hit a replace edit, it's going to use these two playheads as sync points and line them up. So we'll just come over to the toolbar and hit replace. And now when we play it back, you'll hear that the loudest part of the audio lines up with the picture. The next step is to go through and start color coding your tracks. Just to explain that we color coded some clips beforehand, we color coded bins beforehand, and now we can color code tracks. So if we wanted to do something like change audio 2 to that track color to an orange color, and maybe this audio 3, which is our music, we'll change that to an olive color. So now we have different colors for our different tracks. It's just an easier way to understand what is on each track by color coding them. Okay, so we started with that, just doing a simple edit on the Maldives, and we're going to do the rest of them, but it's very easy in this timeline because we don't have that many markers in our source clip or in our timeline. But if you have a bunch more markers in your timeline, you're going to want an easier way than just looking at them in the timeline. So you have an edit index. We're going to open up the edit index. This is every single event to make up our timeline. We don't want every single event. We're just going to come up and show markers, and we only have to show the red markers. So now these are the 3 red markers in our timeline. I'm just going to right click just like in bins, and you can get rid of a lot of these things. I want color, but I don't want resolution or that or record in, out, right? We're just whittling these down to be just the essential things that we need in our timeline here. All right, so now what we can do is I think I need notes too, right? Sometimes notes just appears way off the screen here. You're just going to want to scroll these over. Okay, so now we have the first one. We're going to double click on that. It is the Roaring Jet Takeoff. And we can find that in our source viewer. But again, this is pretty small. If you have more than just 3 markers, it's going to be pretty hard to find the marker you want. So what you can do is in your bin, you can look at it in list view. You'll have a little disclosure arrow next to the clip. You can click on that, and now you have essentially the markers identified as little sort of subclips or multiple in and out points on your main master clip, the sound effect. So I can find this Roaring Jet Takeoff. I know that this is exactly the piece that I want because I used a duration marker. And if I drag that into my timeline, it's only going to take the area marked by the duration marker. So I have this little small clip, and I can play that back. And it matches up nicely. I can go to my next one, which is the loud prop plane. This is my last sound effects. Here's my loud sound effects prop. I can just drag it in place and just play, and there's my sound effect. And that's really all you're doing here in the markers and editing them in. You're doing roughly 3 markers on the timeline plus 1 VFX kind of annotation that you don't really do anything else with further on. And then you do 3 in the source viewer, and then you edit them in. The next thing is you point out that obviously these are not linked. If we pick up any of these clips that have sound effects with them, they are not tied together, so they won't move together. So the way you can tie them together or link them is just select the first sound effect, hold down the Command or the Control key on Windows, and then click the matching video clip, right click over either one of them and just say linked clips. And now they'll have little linked icons which indicate that if I pick this clip up, this A2 A380 clip, the sound effect will go with it. The next part that we go over is just monitoring and solo. So you go through and you start to play clips and you solo them and mute them, just so people understand these two buttons and how they can use them. And what we're going to do is make sure that we end up soloed on audio 1. This is your primary kind of interview audio, so that's the one we're going to deal with first. And in order to do that, we start to talk about meters, and we open up the mixer and we start to talk about these meters over here, and we play them.
In this film, making a documentary
Now,
about
people
how the
don't
airplanes
always
changed.
know about how to read meters, so you generally take the time to explain how to read meters, and the presentation, the keynote or PowerPoint presentation that you're using for the course actually has some slides that you can follow if you're not if you don't have them yourself or you want something to guide the discussion. So we can start off with this kind of audio measurement basics. So this is a meter in DaVinci Resolve. These are called RMS peak meters, and you can see it shows you the full bar, green, yellow, and red. Red doesn't mean you're clipping, it just means you're getting close to it and you're above the audio threshold, really. You can see it has a little peak icon, a little 1 pixel line at the top. That is your peak meter. The rest is just kind of an instantaneous average for the moment. That's what the solid bar is. So these RMS, how do you read these RMS peak meters? Well, they're done in decibels, and decibels are relative values. So if you're boosting something up 10 dB, you're not hitting 10 dB, you're just moving things up 10 dB. So if it's at minus 30, you are now at minus 20 if you raise it 10 dB. You're not at 10 dB. 0 dB means there's no change in the level. Minus 10 dB means you've lowered by 10 decibels. So when you talk about decibels full scale, those are absolute values. 0 dB full scale, FS, is the system maximum level. You can't go any higher than that or you start to clip. That's why if you look at the meter, 0 is at the top and there isn't anything below that, anything above that. So every mix that you do will always have a meter reading that's under 0. It's some negative value. And minus 10 dB full scale means you are at minus 10 dB. You are 10 dB below the system maximum level. So there's dB and dBFS, and one is relative and one is absolute. And right now what you're looking at in the meter is obviously dBFS, right? Those are the minus 50, minus 40, minus 30, minus 20, all the way up to 0. Now, when you're reading the audio meters, 0 dBFS is the maximum system volume. You never try and hit 0. That means you're going to start to clip. And if you're dealing with colorists, then you might want to explain that this is like going above 1023 on your waveform or your parade scope. Now, below that, you have a pro reference level, which is around minus 18, minus 20, depending on where you are in the world. And this is kind of where your average sound is going to hang out. This is where it's going to bounce around in this kind of general range. The nominal peak, around minus 10, minus 12 dBFS, the nominal peak is where the peak that the system is designed for. Now, you can certainly go higher because there's headroom there to go all the way just up to 0, right? But the system is designed for this nominal peak that kind of most of your peak levels are going to hover around minus 10, minus 12. Doesn't mean that they can't go higher, and you'll have kind of spikes or transients, momentary hits that do go above that, and that's okay. This is just giving you the idea of where most of your sound will end up, your pro reference level, and where the system is designed the peaks to end up at. Now, as a rough guide, when you're working with audio, it's good to have a rough guide. So we give the students rough targets for audio elements. For instance, dialogue, you're generally going to try and have the dialogue peaks around minus 12. Can they go higher? Absolutely. They can be minus 10, minus 5, whatever. But you try and hit around minus 12 for your dialogue peaks, right? Your peaks in your sound effects are going to fall somewhere between minus 30 and minus 10. because there's a range of sound effects, right? So you're going to have a range in there. Is it crickets? Is it the jet taking off? Those are two different sounds. They'll be at two different levels. Music is similar. Is this totally background music, or is it more music in the forefront? But generally it's going to flow between -30 and -20. It's going to fall somewhere in between there. You will adjust these obviously on a case-by-case basis, but you want to give people some idea, some range to target when they're first setting off these clip levels. So we are going to start by doing some clip level adjustments, and that's what we're going to work on first. We're going to go through clip by clip on one track, and we're going to set the levels for this one track on a clip by clip basis. Then you end up going to audio track 2 and audio track 3, and you're working on a clip basis first, and then later you'll work on a comparison of tracks. How does track 1 sound to track 2? So right now we're just going to work on this first track here, and what you want for this first audio track, which is the primary audio track, if you're doing a dramatic piece, this would be your dialogue. Here it's our interview. This is the primary audio in the system. This is what we want to be the loudest. So we would raise the level so that the peaks are in there, in the range of what we want. You can do that pretty easily here with by normalizing these clips. And what we're going to do is work on the first one. We're just going to select all of the clips in the timeline, all on audio track 1. We're going to right click over it, any one of the selected clips, and choose normalize audio levels. When you do that, a dialog is going to come up, and it's going to allow you to set the reference level, the peak level, for the selected audio tracks. So in a DBFS setting, where do you want this audio to peak at? Now we're going to put in something like -5 here. That's where we want our loudest peak to end up with. Now the settings below that, relative and independent, this has to do with each one of these clips, right, has a peak in it. So are we taking the loudest peak from all of these clips, meaning this one has the loudest peak? Am I setting that to -5, and wherever these peaks in these don't really matter because this is the one I'm setting to -5? Or are we treating each clip independently and setting the peak that exists on each clip to -5? And we're going to do that because these have slightly different levels inside of them on each clip. So what we're going to do is treat them all independently and make sure that the peaks on each clip, rather than treat them as one clip kind of, and raise the peak, the loudest peak to -5. We're going to raise the loudest peak on each clip to -5. And then just hit normalize. You'll see that they all kind of boost up. And now if you play over any one of them, right, they're all going, and you look at your meter, they'll peak around -5, but they won't go any higher. And most of it is going to end up right around -10, -12 on the average. Now, sometimes you will still have to go in and you will have to modify the volumes on a specific clip level. For instance, let's take a listen to this jump cut. The second part of this jump cut clip is a little bit louder.
If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location.
Right, and there's a noticeable change in volume there. It's much louder on this second clip. So I'm just going to zoom in, and I'm going to click off to make sure nothing is selected. Now, when I select this second clip, the way we can change that volume is this way we did it in lesson 1. If you remember, we went up to the inspector, we have our clip volume, and you can adjust the volume right here. So with that selected in the timeline, I am now adjusting the volume only on this clip, and I'm just going to play it by ear and listen to it.
We would either go back to that,
and that's at a much better level. I just lowered it to 7, right around there, and that should be fine. Okay, you can also adjust the levels in the timeline. I'm going to close up my inspector. I'm going to Shift Z so I can see my entire timeline. And I'm going to come down to my my sound effects clips, and I'm going to solo the sound effects clips and turn off the solo for the dialogue or the interview clips. And I'm going to come in to my first one, And I'm going to play over the first sound effect. So looking at the meters that might be considered a little bit loud, instead of going all the way up to the inspector, you can adjust the volume right here in the timeline using the volume line. It's the same thing as using the inspector, it's just right here. And we'll just drag that down a little bit, minus 10, something like that, dB. So now we'll play that back and we'll hear, and we'll watch our levels. It's falling just below minus 20, which is pretty good on our meter. So if we wanted this same level to be applied to these two other additional sound effects, we can do the same thing we did with the reframing clip. So we can come in here, we can select the sound effects, go up to the edit and choose copy, come down and select the two remaining sound effects and choose paste attributes. Paste attributes will come up. This time we'll select audio volume and choose apply. And now these two volume adjustments are applied there. Naturally, we might go back and might tweak them, but it's a great quick way to get things at a basic consistency. The next thing is we'll deal with the music track. The music track is a little bit different because it requires multiple volume changes on a single clip. So what we're going to do is just click on the solo of audio 2 for the music and click off the solo for audio 3. But we might want to hear it in conjunction with the dialogue just so we know where to begin and end. So we might solo that as well, audio 1 and audio 2. We'll come into the beginning.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world.
The music overall is going to be too loud, so we're just going to bring that down maybe to about minus 30 dB, bring it down minus 30 dB or so.
It's really important to go out and shoot the real world.
That might be too low, so we'll do minus 20. Raise it up 10 dB. So when his voice is there,
shoot.
You want it to be at a certain level. When his voice ends and there's nothing, we want it to be louder. So what we're going to do is build in a change in the volume, and you do it by adding keyframes. We're going to add a keyframe where it should start to increase the volume, and we're going to option click on the track where we want it to start, and maybe we want it to just go a little bit further in, option click again. That's our second kind of keyframe, and we're going to raise the volume level, and we'll play it.
Shoot the real world.
It's a little late, but you can shift these by just clicking and dragging them, right? So I can select one and just drag it over, select another one, drag it over, and now it'll be louder earlier.
Shoot the real world.
And looking at the meter, this might be a little bit loud, but it's not bad. We can lower it just by dragging the volume line. Get it a little bit better, closer to minus 20 there. Now when he comes in again, you would obviously do the same thing. Option for 2 keyframes and bring it down.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it.
And that's how you can set different levels within a clip. Lastly, we're going to do a fade. And much like we did the fade on the video track, you can do it on the audio tracks as well. Just hover your mouse over the track. You'll get those white handles in the upper left and right corners. And we can just drag them in to make a little 1 second fade up or longer.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
And that is the end of this lesson.